Hey guys, tonight we will continue our journey behind the hidden curtain of King Henry VIII's 6 wives, with 101 shocking weird facts about Henry VIII's 6 wives and more, part 2. Full of thrilling, spine-tingling details you've never heard before. In particular, Fact 80. 8 in this installment will leave you utterly speechless from shock. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is in your local area now. Dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. And most importantly, if any fact here makes you nod in agreement, please comment its number and title. And if any fact raises your eyebrow in doubt, I don't hesitate to share. So we can discuss together. This is a space for history lovers. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. And I can't wait to dive into the conversation with you. Fact 51. When the Pilgrimage of Grace rose in 1536, Jane Seymour intervened and was sternly warned by Henry. In 1536, a great uprising known as the Pilgrimage of Grace erupted across the north of England, a mass protest against the dissolution of the monasteries and the sweeping religious reforms imposed by King Henry VIII. Peasants, gentry, and disaffected nobles rallied under sacred banners, demanding the restoration of church lands and the rightful place of Princess Mary as heir. Word of their fervour reached the court at Hampton, and Queen Jane Seymour, still in her first year as queen, felt compelled to plead on behalf of the people. She dispatched secret missives to her husband and implored his privy council to show mercy to the ringleaders, including Robert Aske, the movement's colonel. In a hushed letter, she wrote, "My lord, to remember the affection of your subjects and temper your vengeance with grace." Henry's reaction was icy. Summoning the court to Westminster Hall, he declared that Jane must recall the fate of Anne Boleyn if she presumed to meddle again in matters of state or religion. He reminded her that the power to pardon or to punish belonged entirely to him. From that moment, Jane never dared to speak of policy again, fearful that even her gentlest entreaty might echo Anne's downfall. This exchange revealed that, despite her outward submission, Jane possessed genuine compassion for her people, but in the Tudor court, a well-intentioned political council could be deemed too bold and punished in kind. Fact 52. After Henry's threat, Jane never intervened in policy again. Following his admonition during the Pilgrimage of Grace crisis, Jane Seymour adopted an austere silence. She severed her ties with political advisors and withdrew her patronage of reform-minded scholars. Royal records show her returning volumes of theological debate and confiscated correspondence to the Crown archives. At every banquet, she sat motionless, a living statue in courtly attire, consuming her meals in serene quiet. In private gatherings of ladies-in-waiting, she urged them to defer from politics and chat instead of embroidery, gardening, or needlepoint. Henry noted her change with satisfaction. In his personal diary, he praised Jane's untroubled presence and quietly increased her dowry so she might live out her days in peaceful luxury. Never since his accession had he felt so undisturbed. By embracing absolute obedience and distancing herself from statecraft, Jane preserved both her life and her rank. In the harsh realities of Tudor rule, retreating from political speech was the wisest path to safety for a queen. Fact 53. Jane conceived Prince Edward in 1537, over a year after becoming queen. It was not until March of 1537, more than a year into their marriage, that Jane Seymour at last announced her pregnancy. A hush of anticipation spread through the realm. This was Henry's final chance for a male heir. Jane drew from the lessons of Catherine of Aragon, postponing all courtly duties and receptions to devote herself wholly to the health of her unborn child. Under strict medical supervision, she followed a diet rich in protein and iron, a regimen nearly unheard of in Tudor England. Jane was moved to Hampton Court Palace, where a private wing overlooked sheltered gardens and a large hearth. Above the door hung her personal badge, obéir et servir, a reminder of her vow to obey and to serve. Each morning, she knelt in the chapel to pray for protection of the child. Court physicians, keenly aware of the political stakes, instituted what they called the first obstetric watch for a queen, daily checks of her pulse, dietary records, and the careful monitoring of her condition. Such devoted care stood in sharp contrast to the neglect Catherine had endured decades before. News of Jane's pregnancy spread through diplomatic channels to France and Spain, stirring hope among allies and stunning Henry's rivals. Plans were drawn for celebrations, heralding the future prince's birth, a grand procession, specially minted coins, and new statutes to commemorate the Tudor line. All eyes turned to Jane's waning silhouette, and the entire court held its breath. For this unborn child might so easily rescue the dynasty from its lingering crises. In these three truths, we see Jane Seymour's compassion, her cautious retreat from power, and her eventual success as mother to Henry's only legitimate son. Yet even the arrival of Prince Edward could not dissolve the shadow cast by Tudor politics, a reminder that in King Henry's court, no amount of loyalty or love guaranteed a queen's security. Fact 54: Jane suffered undiagnosed preeclampsia in her third trimester. As Jane Seymour entered her third trimester, she began to experience swelling in her hands and feet, coupled with pounding headaches, classic signs of preeclampsia. Yet Tudor physicians had no concept of this condition. They misread her fluid retention as proof that the baby was flourishing and dismissed her headaches as mere female melancholy. Their remedy was to bleed her repeatedly, to rebalance the humours, and administer strong purgative draughts of herbal concoctions, believing they would detoxify her system. Bound by outdated medical theory, Jane was ordered to bed rest, forbidden prolonged sitting, and instructed to avoid the sun's glare. She lay for hours on end, gazing anxiously at her swollen limbs. While the court pressed daily inquiries about the unborn prince, no one paused to consider that her rising blood pressure and protein-laden urine symptoms, later recognized as hallmark features of severe preeclampsia, were signs of a life-threatening complication. By October 1537, Jane's condition had escalated into acute preeclampsia. Her blood pressure soared, and her urine tested positive for albumin. Still, court physicians dismissed these red flags as trifling women's complaints. Continuing their regimen of leeching and laxatives, their failure to monitor her vital signs or adjust her care meant that when labour finally began, neither Jane nor the palace was prepared for the crisis ahead. The very hands meant to protect the unborn heir, instead, allowed a silent, invisible threat to take root, turning what should have been a sanctuary for childbirth into a scene of impending tragedy. Fact 55. Jane endured 3 days of agonizing labour at Hampton Court. On the 9th of October, 1537, Jane Seymour's long-anticipated labour began, hindered by untreated preeclampsia and persistent edema. Her childbirth progressed agonizingly slow, stretching over 72 hours. Under the strict rules of courtly protocol, only midwives and her ladies-in-waiting were permitted in her chamber. Male attendants stood outside, barred from entering. Though the heavy canopy veiled Jane's ordeal, the cries and low moans of pain echoed through the palace halls. Tudor obstetric records describe Jane's pallor and profuse sweating as she battled contractions, each wave sapping her strength. Her attendants alternated between gently massaging her legs to stimulate circulation and using coarse implements to encourage the birth, while midwives manipulated the baby's position by feel. Without anesthetic or antiseptic, Jane endured every element of the prolonged labour, her body racked by pain, her spirit sustained only by whispered prayers and the comforting voice of the chaplain at her side. King Henry watched with mounting anguish, frequently visiting her chamber, adjusting his sleeve as he anxiously asked after the prince. Yet there was little he could do beyond pacing the corridors in powerless concern. On the 12th of October 1537, Jane finally delivered a son, christened Edward, to the jubilant cheers of the court. But the Queen's victory was bittersweet. Her body, weakened by days of unrelenting effort and depleted by chronic bloodletting, began to fail. A concealed tear, likely from placental complications, bled internally, and without modern surgical care, Jane slipped into a critical state. While courtiers prepared grand festivities to celebrate the newborn prince, only a few understood how dire Jane's condition had become. The very medical practices meant to preserve her health had mortally imperiled her. In those final hours, the palace's bright banners and trumpets stood in stark contrast to the dim reality behind the closed doors of the birthing chamber, a reminder that in Tudor England, a queen's greatest gift could be paid for with her life. Fact 57. Jane's labour began on the 9th of October and lasted 3 exhausting days. In the early hours of the 9th of October 1537, Jane Seymour's long-anticipated labour commenced within the sheltered walls of Hampton Court. Under the strict protocols of Tudor royalty, only the appointed midwife and 3 of her nearest ladies-in-waiting were permitted to remain by her side. Over the next 72 hours, Jane endured unrelenting contractions, her chamber filled with the soft flicker of candlelight, the whispered murmur of prayers, and the occasional muffled cry of pain. With no anesthesia to ease her suffering, Jane was offered only spiced wine to sip and a smooth silver amulet to press between her lips in moments of peak agony. For the first 2 days, the baby remained high in her womb, refusing to turn into an optimal birthing position. Each hour stretched into eternity as Jane grew weaker and more delirious. Her attendants alternated between gentle back massages to coax circulation and the application of cooling lavender oils to soothe her inflamed skin. On the morning of the 3rd day, when Jane's uterus finally gave way to a fierce contraction, the hush in her chamber broke with a rush of hope. A courtier sprinted down the corridor to summon the king, while the chaplain entered to administer last rites, should they prove necessary. Outside, echoes of incense smoke mingled with the hushed recitation of psalms. Yet none of it could mask the sound of Jane's laboured breathing, an oral testament to her courage and endurance. Fact 58. Jane delivered Prince Edward on the 12th of October, but paid a high price. Just past dawn on the 12th of October, 1537, the prolonged ordeal reached its climax. Jane Seymour gave birth to a healthy baby boy, christened Edward. In a simple bedchamber at Hampton Court, the announcement unleashed joyous cheers throughout the palace. Trumpets blared, en courtier clapped, and warm yellow swaddling cloths were readied for the newborn heir, King Henry VIII. Counting on one hand the days since Jane lodged her first cries, marked the moment with relief and celebration. Yet Jane herself lay pale and exhausted, her strength spent, though she managed a weak smile upon hearing her son's first wail. Her body trembled with the toll of 3 days in labour. Attendants hurried to her side with mugs of hot honeyed wine and warmed cloths to press against her forehead. The very ecstasy that bathed the court in light cast a deeper shadow within her chamber. Everyone sensed that the Queen's fragile frame had endured more than any sovereign should. Fact 59. A hidden tear and grave postpartum. Hemorrhage ravaged Jane's health within hours of her triumph. As mother to the future, King Edward VI, Jane's condition took a dire turn. Unbeknownst to her or her attendants, a tear had formed in her uterine wall during delivery. The court's midwives, skilled in tradition but ignorant of antisepsis, attempted to staunch the bleeding by seating her on a hard wooden chair and applying poultices of plantain and clover. They urged her to remain still, believing that rest alone would heal her. But the hemorrhage continued, unseen and unstoppable. Jane's pallor deepened to a ghostly white as she slipped into delirium, her pulse thinning with each passing hour. When the court physicians were summoned, they conjectured that her afterbirth was cleansing the body, and recommended further bleeding and laxatives, measures that only worsened her blood loss. Jane clutched the hand of her loyal midwife, murmuring prayers for both her son and her soul. as the life drained from her in tragic silence. Fact 60. Jane died on the 24th of October, 12 days after giving birth. On the 24th of October, 1537, just 12 days after Edward's birth, Jane Seymour succumbed to what contemporaries called childbed fever, today recognized as puerperal sepsis, complicated by acute blood loss. In her final hours, King Henry paced the corridors outside her chamber, daring not to enter for fear of hastening her end. He sent for anointing oils and sacred texts, yet offered only a hushed command: "Let me know if she falters." In the quiet of Hampton Court, Jane's passing was marked by minimal ceremony, a brief vigil, a simple shroud of pale linen, and a coffin borne away without trumpet, fanfare. The newborn prince, barely 2 weeks old, was laid in a separate cradle, his life secured, even as his mother's flickering candle went out. The court donned black armbands and scattered white roses in the palace gardens, mourning the queen who had fulfilled her destiny at the cost of her own. Jane Seymour remains the only one of Henry's wives to rest beside him at Windsor, although within 4 years, the king's pursuit of alliances and heirs would lead him once more to the altar. Her death stands as a sobering testament. Absolute obedience and maternal sacrifice could not shield a Tudor queen from the perils of childbirth, reminding us that in 16th century England, a woman's greatest triumph might bring her swiftest downfall. Fact 61. Henry VIII paid only brief visits during Jane's final 12 days. In the 12 days that followed Jane Seymour's prolonged labour, King Henry VIII found himself swept up in the jubilant preparations to welcome their newborn son. The palace resounded with plans for tournaments, banquets, and elaborate pageantry, each event requiring the king's direct oversight. As a result, he made only a handful of fleeting visits to Jane's bedside. Court records note that he would peer through the doorway, inquire of her condition in a few clipped words, and then depart. Jane, though weakened by her ordeal, mustered a faint smile as his silhouette receded, longing perhaps for a tender hand to ease her pain. Yet the king, driven by duty to the realm's new heir, scarcely paused to offer more than perfunctory concern. Whispered among the corridors was the observation that Henry appeared more joyful than worried, his thoughts fixed firmly on the prince rather than the princess who had borne him. In those final hours, Jane realized all too keenly that her value in his eyes lay in her ability to produce an heir. Once that task was accomplished, his attentions turned immediately elsewhere. She had become, in the stark calculus of the Tudor court, a royal womb rather than a cherished companion. Fact 62. Fevered delirium. Jane called for Edward and clung to the hope of embrace. As the unseen infection coursing through Jane Seymour's body erupted into full-blown sepsis, she was seized by high fevers and hallucinatory delirium. Between bouts of burning heat and chills, her lips parted into laboured whispers of Edward. Edward! The midwife who tended her recalled how Jane, eyes glassy with yearning, reached out as though to cradle her 12-day-old son. Yet, for fear of spreading the deadly infection, no one would permit the infant prince to be brought into her chamber. Her pleas echoed unanswered through the silk-draped room. Jane grasped at the empty air, imagining the warmth of her child's small frame against her breast. The royal nursery beyond the door held her son safe from harm, but also safe from his mother's final embraces. In those tragic moments, the gulf between life and death was made achingly clear. Jane's heart pounded for Edward, while her failing body lay shackled by a cruel fate. Fact 63. After her death, Henry proclaimed Jane had fulfilled the Queen's highest duty. Within hours of Jane Seymour's passing, King Henry VIII issued a solemn proclamation his Queen had accomplished the highest duty of her station, the birth of a male heir. In recognition, the court declared a fortnight of subdued mourning, during which courtiers wore black armbands and the Queen's own livery was draped in muted tones. Poets and chroniclers composed elegies, lauding Jane's selfless sacrifice, celebrating her as the gentle mother of the realm. Yet beneath the official praise, some nobles whispered that these accolades were little more than statecraft. They murmured that Henry had crafted Jane's posthumous reputation to reinforce the ideal of a queen as the producer of heirs, nothing more. In a kingdom where female agency was viewed through the lens of fertility, Jane's memory was sculpted to reflect the function she served rather than the woman she was. Fact 64. Jane Seymour is the only Henry VIII wife buried beside him at Windsor. When Jane Seymour's coffin was laid to rest in the royal vault at St. George's Chapel, Windsor Castle, future mausoleum of monarchs, it marked an unparalleled honour. Of all Henry VIII's 6 wives, only Jane would share his final resting place. Catherine of Aragon lay interred at Peterborough Abbey, Anne Boleyn in a modest tomb by the Tower of London, and the other consorts in scattered locations. By choosing Windsor, Henry signalled that Jane's legacy above all his wives stood closest to his own heart, largely because she had borne his long-sought son and heir. In death, she gained a kind of permanence that her successors would envy. To her tombstone, a silent testament to the Tudor dynasty's most fragile triumph, even as Henry's relentless quest for heirs and alliances led him from marriage to marriage. It was Jane, his 3rd queen, who would rest for eternity beside the greatest Tudor sovereign. Fact 65. Henry preserved Jane's chambers at Hampton Court for decades. After Jane Seymour's death, King Henry VIII issued a curious edict. The Queen's private apartments at Hampton Court were to remain exactly as she had left them. Her silken drapes stayed drawn in sombre silence. Her dressing table kept meticulously arranged, and the wardrobe doors remained closed, untouched by any servant's hand. Rumour has it the king believed Jane's spirit might return to the familiar surroundings to watch over their son, Edward, whether born of superstition or genuine grief. This gesture created a small sanctuary of remembrance amid the ever-changing court. For 20 years, no one dared to move a single piece of furniture in that suite. Courtiers spoke in hushed tones of the silent tribute, a room frozen in time that served as a private monument to the queen who had given her life for the Tudor dynasty. In the flicker of candlelight, the undisturbed chambers whispered of sacrifice, a testament to Jane's final, selfless gift to England. Fact 66. Anne of Cleves was chosen solely on Holbein's portrait following Jane's passing. Henry sought a new alliance with the Protestant states of northern Europe. To that end, he dispatched the court painter Hans Holbein the Younger to capture the likeness of Anne of Cleves, daughter of a German duke. When Holbein returned with his exacting miniature Anne clad in sumptuous robes, her countenance serene and noble, Henry declared it perfect and agreed to marriage without ever meeting her in person. Courtiers like Thomas Cromwell pressed him on every side. Such an alliance could bind England to the Lutheran princes. The king, enchanted by the exquisite image, believed the portrait to be an infallible guarantee of Anne's beauty and disposition. In October 1539, scarcely weeks after the painting's arrival, Henry and his council drafted the marriage contract. The transaction resembled ordering from a catalogue, a royal match based on paint and canvas, unmoved by real acquaintance. Anne of Cleves thus became the 4th wife by portrait, her destiny sealed by pigment and brush rather than by shared vows. Fact 67. Anne spoke no English at her own wedding, turning the ceremony into a comedy of miscommunication. When Anne of Cleves arrived at Westminster Hall in December 1539, she spoke only German and a smattering of Latin, no English or French. On the 6th of January 1540, at the public ceremony, she stood baffled before the bishop, unable to comprehend his Latin phrases or respond coherently. Diplomats whispered that she simply bowed and smiled, hoping to mask her confusion. Mistaken names were spoken, formalities were forgotten, and at times the poor bride seemed to consult her translator more often than the service itself. Despite lavish golden embroidery on her gown and the glitter of crown jewels, Anne's body language betrayed her utter disorientation. Henry, watching from the throne, felt a prick of disappointment. The portrait's promise gave way to a reality he barely recognized. The marriage feast that followed banquets dripping with gold plate and sweetmeats could not disguise the awkwardness that had overtaken the happiest day of her life. Fact 68. The first meeting at Rochester ended in acute disillusionment. Believing in the magic of spontaneous passion, Henry arranged a secret rendezvous with Anne at Rochester Castle on the 31st of December 1539, several days before their formal wedding, disguised in plain clothes. He hoped to see her unguarded, to make love, conquer the cold formality of politics. Instead, Anne greeted the stranger with careful courtesy, her composure intact but her gaze expressly reserved. She neither removed her hood nor broke the measured politeness expected of a noblewoman. Her words were clipped and polite, her manner vigilant. Henry's heart sank. He noted her more angular jaw and heavier features, far from the delicate woman captured in Holbein's brushstrokes. Returning to his retinue with a furrowed brow, he pronounced in dismay, "I have been deceived by that painted lie." That day's disillusionment sealed the fate of their brief union. Henry's eagerness gave way to regret, setting in motion the swift annulment that would dissolve their marriage just months after it began. Fact 69. Henry complained bitterly about Anne's appearance and scent after the disappointing encounter at Rochester Castle. Henry VIII let loose a torrent of criticism. He declared that Anne of Cleves looked nothing like Hans Holbein's masterful portrait. He complained that her skin was sallow and rough to the touch, far from the luminous softness he had been promised. Worse yet, he scoffed that she carried an unpleasant odour, a consequence, he claimed, of travelling in a tightly packed trunk for days without fresh air. In the king's view, Holbein had laid on too much light and gloss to disguise her true flaws. These grievances are recorded in Holbein's own diary, in which the artist bristled at being branded a charlatan. He pleaded with the king that every painter must blend truth with a touch of idealization. But Henry refused to accept that art could ever diverge from reality. Desperate to justify ending the marriage, the king seized upon Anne's perceived blemishes, her uneven complexion and subtle musk, as grounds for annulment, arguing that a union based on a false image was legally invalid. Fact 70. Anne faced a stark choice: annul the marriage or lose everything. By July 1540, Henry VIII had publicly announced his intention to dissolve the marriage with Anne of Cleves. He cited the union's non-consummation and the discrepancies between her portrait and person as legal reasons. Anne was presented with a stark ultimatum. If she agreed to the divorce, she would be granted the rare title of the king's beloved sister, a generous allowance, and the freedom to travel unchaperoned across England. But if she resisted, she risked a charge of high treason for defying the king's will. Recognizing the vast imbalance of power, Anne accepted the terms without hesitation. She signed the annulment papers, relinquishing any claim to queenship. In return, she received ample estates, a yearly income far above that of most noble widows, and a degree of autonomy unknown to previous consorts. Henry's manoeuvre set an important legal precedent. It affirmed his absolute right to annul a royal marriage at will and to establish the Church of England in order to bypass the Pope's judgment. Anne of Cleves thus became known as the king's sister, living out her days in comfort and independence over the next 17 years. Proof of Henry's ruthless pragmatism in marital matters. Fact 71. The Cleves wedding was a cringeworthy affair. When Henry and Anne finally wed on January the 6th, 1542, at Greenwich Palace, the ceremony was hurried, discreet, and fraught with awkwardness. Rather than a festive court spectacle, the event felt more like a solemn obligation. Henry appeared sullen, as if compelled by political necessity rather than personal desire. Anne, unfamiliar with English customs and without command of the language, curtsied and repeated the marriage vows as her interpreter recited them, her words echoing hollowly in the vaulted hall. Courtiers whispered that the pair resembled two actors awkwardly reciting lines in a poorly staged play, their eyes never meeting in genuine affection. The guest list was confined to the king's closest advisers and privy councillors. No foreign diplomats were invited. No trumpets or banners cleared the streets. Even the traditional procession through London was scrapped, for Henry had already grown weary of his fourth bride. This stilted ceremony made it abundantly clear that the marriage served only to bolster political alliances, devoid of any real emotion. Fact 72. The marriage was never consummated, sealing its swift end. Following the muted wedding, Henry VIII and Anne of Cleves retired to the royal chambers, yet never shared the marital bed. Henry claimed that in person, Anne's presence failed to ignite any conjugal passion. He insisted that the marriage remained unconsummated, citing the stark contrast between the painted promise and the living reality. Under English law, non-consummation provided a clear route to annulment. Anne was compelled to sign a declaration affirming that no physical union had taken place. Simultaneously, Henry and his lawyers assembled theological and legal arguments, invoking the ancient Roman principle that contracts founded on deception could be voided. By using the claim of non-consummation alongside the portrait's alleged misrepresentation, Henry dissolved the marriage quickly and with minimal scandal. In those days, a royal affair could be undone as easily as a merchant's contract. Anne accepted her demotion with remarkable grace. She emerged from the union financially secure, titled as the king's sister, and free to govern her own estates. Henry moved on to his fifth marriage just weeks later, his actions underscoring a brutal truth for Henry VIII. Marriage was a transaction governed by political expediency, and once a bride no longer served his dynastic aims, she could be quietly set aside. Fact 73. Anne of Cleves became a public spectre at court. For the 6 months she held the title of Queen, Anne of Cleves found herself increasingly sidelined by Henry VIII. He conspicuously omitted her from state occasions. She was rarely at his side when foreign ambassadors arrived, and he entrusted the reception of visiting dignitaries to ladies-in-waiting rather than to her. Dinner parties became lonely affairs for Anne. She would sit upon her lowly throne while guests were greeted first by the king's outstretched hand, and only then permitted to exchange a brief, formal glance with their queen. In the corridors and antechambers of Whitehall and Greenwich, whispers spread that Anne was little more than a royal phantom, a queen in name, yet invisible in influence. To the people of London, she embodied the stark reality that a woman's rank meant nothing if the king refused to acknowledge her presence. Fact 74. Lost in translation. Oblivious to her own annulment, because she spoke little English and had no direct access to the king's legal advisers, Anne of Cleves remained bewildered by the dissolution of her marriage. She received the official notice only through interpreters. Your marriage is declared null and void on grounds of invalidity and non-consummation. Forced to place her trust in the few German retainers who accompanied her to Richmond Palace, she had no opportunity to plead her case or consult Tudor jurists on the merits of her position. Isolated in her new residence, Anne's inability to grasp the intricacies of English law deepened her anguish. Though she held the rank of Queen Dowager, she felt powerless without the means to challenge the verdict. She could only submit to a fate dictated by a foreign court. Fact 75. From queen to beloved, sister of the king, facing the stark alternatives of acquiescing to annulment or risking charges of treason, Anne of Cleves made the strategic choice to agree. Henry VIII, ever mindful of his image and the precedents he set, bestowed upon her the unprecedented title of the king's beloved sister. He granted her an ample income of £4,000 per year and the use of multiple residences, including Richmond Palace and Hever Castle. Unlike any other divorced consort before her, Anne was elevated to the status of an independent noblewoman. She spent the next 17 years travelling freely throughout England, entertaining guests in her own grand style, maintaining lush gardens, and hosting sumptuous banquets. Through this arrangement, she transformed what might have been permanent disgrace into a comfortable, sovereign sanctuary Anne's savvy acceptance of the king's terms preserved her dignity and secured her place in Tudor society, proof that even in defeat, a queen could engineer her own safe haven. Fact 76. Anne of Cleves turned divorce into a life of leisure. Once styled the king's beloved sister, Anne of Cleves embraced her unexpected freedom by forging a serene, almost pastoral existence, far removed from the stresses of royal matrimony. She began by mastering English hiring tutors to guide her pronunciation and grammar, and soon engaged with local gentry in heartfelt hospitality. Rather than secluding herself at Richmond, Anne threw open her new estates, hosting lavish dinners that mingled French, German, and English cuisine as a gentle form of diplomacy. In her quiet moments, she tended extensive gardens of vegetables, roses, and therapeutic herbs, lavender for calm, rosemary for health, using them both in family remedies and as fragrant gifts for neighbours. Witnesses recalled seeing her at dawn, gliding through dew-sprinkled paths in light silk, offering warm smiles to all who crossed her way, hardly the posture of a woman haunted by courtly intrigue. Generosity became her hallmark. Each year she sponsored relief for displaced German princes, channeling funds to monasteries despoiled by religious reform. Her annual charity feasts distributed bread and ale to the poor, earning her a reputation as a benevolent matron. In doing so, Anne proved that life after annulment could be one of comfort, purpose, and genuine goodwill. An oasis of calm humanity following the storm of Tudor politics. Fact 77. Anne declined suitors, choosing the freedom of singlehood. Over the 17 years following her annulment, Anne of Cleves received countless marriage proposals from English nobles and even foreign princes hopeful of a royal connection. Yet she refused, each with courteous firmness. Many found it astonishing a wealthy, powerful woman, free to wed, might normally secure another alliance. In letters to her sister, Anne wrote, "I have weathered enough royal tragedy to know that true happiness lies in solitude." She dedicated her days to gardening, travel, and welcoming fellow Cleves expatriates, cultivating a life rich in personal choice rather than ceremonial obligation. Her resolute singlehood offered a new model, a woman who placed her own liberty above the customary pursuit of dynastic security. By remaining unmarried, Anne cemented her status as a sovereign with real agency. No husband could claim sway over her estates or her voice. Her example quietly inspired later English aristocrats to seek marriages of affection rather than pure political calculation. In her refusal, Anne claimed a powerful legacy of independence. Fact 78. Anne lived to age 41. Outlasting Henry by a decade, Anne of Cleves died on the 16th of July, 1557, at around 41 years of age, nearly 10 years after Henry VIII's own passing. Contemporary accounts attribute her death to a sudden bout of pneumonia, a common and often fatal illness in the 16th century. Until her final breath, she remained mentally sharp, leaving no complex will but a simple entreaty to her heirs: live in peace. Her body was interred in Westminster Abbey, beside her Cleves kin rather than the English monarchs. Her funeral was dignified yet reflective of her dual heritage: English courtiers, German envoys, and European ambassadors gathered to mourn a princess, renowned for her charity and grace. Poets hailed her quiet strength and selfless devotion, cementing her posthumous fame as both a dutiful sister of the crown and a compassionate benefactor. Fact 79. Anne maintained warm ties with Henry's children. Despite her annulled status, Anne of Cleves fostered genuine affection with Henry VIII's offspring Mary, Elizabeth, and Edward. She marked each of their birthdays with thoughtful gifts, taught young Elizabeth to sketch, and cared for little Edward with a gentle, untold-like tenderness. Their bond endured beyond the politics of Henry's reign. At Elizabeth's wedding in 1559, Anne sat among the foremost guests, honoured by a new generation. Mary dubbed her dear aunt, while Elizabeth later wrote of Anne's kindness in her memoirs, crediting her with instilling a sense of maternal warmth. Anne's relationship with the royal children stood as a rare instance of genuine family unity in a court famed for its fractured loyalties. Through her kindness and constancy, Anne of Cleves became the quiet bridge between Henry's turbulent marriages and the peaceful future of his children's reign. In these four truths, we witness Anne's remarkable transformation from sidelined queen to beloved sister, from diplomatic pawn to independent icon, from misunderstood bride to cherished aunt. Her story reminds us that, even amid the brutal churn of Tudor politics, a woman could carve out a life of dignity, compassion, and true self-determination. Fact: 80 Anne of Cleves never remarried and secured her fortune for life. After accepting her role as the king's beloved sister, Anne of Cleves managed her generous stipend of £4,000 per year with admirable wisdom. Rather than dissipate her wealth on courtly luxuries, she invested heavily in estates across Essex and Kent, leasing farmland to tenant farmers and founding a successful wool weaving workshop run by local women. These enterprises provided steady income long after her own lifetime. In 1541, she established a charitable fund dedicated to educating impoverished children of Cleves families living in England. Remarkably, records show that this endowment continued to support schools well into the 17th century. Anne also directed much of her resources to building and equipping small infirmaries on her properties, ensuring that both her tenants and neighbours could receive rudimentary medical care. Through prudent stewardship of her wealth, she transformed what might have been a lifetime of dependency into a lasting legacy of economic and social improvement, proving that even a royal divorcee could become a pillar of her community. Fact: 81. Catherine Parr lived each day in fear, despite surviving Henry VIII. When Catherine Parr became Henry's sixth and final wife in 1543 at the age of 31, she was already twice widowed and well aware of the fate that had befallen his prior consorts. Each morning, she rose with a silent question on her lips. Would this be the day she faced charges of heresy or treason to protect herself? She concealed her true religious sympathies, spoke only in praise of the king at court, and avoided public advocacy for the Protestant reforms she quietly supported. Her caution was not unfounded. In 1546, hardline conservatives led by Bishop Stephen Gardiner and Chancellor Thomas Wriothesley plotted to accuse her of heresy over her newly published book, Prayers or Meditations, which encouraged private scripture reading in English. A writ for her arrest was prepared, promising execution. Catherine learned of the plot from a trusted courtier just hours before her arrest. She immediately fell to her knees before Henry, tears streaming, confessing ignorance and extolling his holiness. Moved by her contrition, Henry personally destroyed the warrant and vowed to protect her from further intrigue. Even after she escaped that peril, Catherine lived under the shadow of fear until Henry's death in January 1547. When the king's funeral rites ended, she donned modest mourning black and finally laid aside her dread. In the years that followed, she married Thomas Seymour, fourth cousin to her first husband, and devoted herself to reformist causes. Catherine later reflected, "I have learned the price of timely humility and the courage to speak truth when danger passes," a testament to the lessons she drew from surviving the Tudor throne's darkest perils. Fact: 82. Catherine Parr was the first of Henry's queens to shape church policy. Unlike any of his previous wives, Catherine Parr actively participated in religious discourse at the highest level. In 1543, she established what contemporaries called the Queen's Council, a circle of noble women sympathetic to evangelical ideas who gathered privately to translate portions of the Bible into English and debate theology. Their efforts directly influenced Henry's decision that same year to authorize the printing of English-language scriptures, an unprecedented move that paved the way for deeper reform of the Church of England. Catherine herself authored Prayers or Meditations, the first devotional book penned by an English queen published in 1545. The volume was lavishly produced and distributed to leading courtiers and compliant clergy, effectively enlisting them in her vision of a more personal, vernacular faith. She used her royal authority to defend reformers such as Archbishop Thomas Cranmer and Bishop Hugh Latimer, intervening behind the scenes to delay prosecutions and curb violent reprisals. To hardline conservatives like Stephen Gardiner, Catherine's influence was nothing short of a threat to the established order. Yet her carefully balanced approach, upholding the outward pageantry of royal worship while quietly championing moderate reform, allowed her to steer the church toward compromise rather than conflict. In doing so, Catherine Parr carved out a unique role as the monarch's spiritual counsellor, solidifying her place as a pivotal architect of England's religious transformation. Fact 83. Catherine Parr became England's first queen to publish in her own name, in 1545. Catherine Parr achieved a milestone no English queen had before she issued her own devotional book, Prayers or Meditations, emblazoned on the title page, by the Most Serene Princess, Catherine, Queen of England. This collection of prayers, scriptural reflections, and biblical commentary was intentionally crafted in English so that noble women could deepen their spiritual lives without reliance on Latin texts. Her decision shattered convention until then. Printed works by royal women typically bore only the names of kings or male scholars. Catherine not only lent her name but also oversaw the editing process, selected the content, and approved the laurel-wreathed emblem that adorned each page. The volume proved a runaway success, going through multiple editions and cementing her legacy as a cultural pioneer. By claiming authority over the written word, she extended the Queen's influence beyond court ceremony into the realms of literature, religion, and female education. Fact 84. Catherine Parr Wednesday. Thomas Seymour, 6 months after Henry's death. Barely half a year after Henry VIII's funeral in January 1547, Catherine Parr surprised the realm by marrying Thomas Seymour, brother of her late predecessor, Jane Seymour. Their union stirred controversy, for Seymour had been a favourite of the former king, and there were fears he might vie for the young Edward's inheritance. Yet Catherine found in Thomas a partner attuned to her own experiences. He petitioned the Privy Council to allow her to remain at Hampton Court, and even coaxed stepdaughter Mary to address Catherine as mother. While they planned to welcome children of their own, Seymour's ambitions led him into plots to elevate Mary's fortunes. Recognizing the threat, Catherine confronted him and quashed his schemes, demonstrating that she could wield authority when her family's welfare was at stake. In stepping beyond the role of royal consort to that of protector of her bloodline, she redefined her position as a matriarch rather than merely a queen. Fact 85. Catherine Parr died from childbirth complications at age 36. In September 1548, Catherine Parr went into labour at Sudeley Castle, delivering a daughter, Mary Seymour. Though doctors and attendants tended her carefully, she contracted childbed fever and succumbed on the 5th of September, only 15 months after Henry's own death. The court was stunned. Catherine, who had navigated the perils of Tudor marriage with remarkable skill, fell victim to the same obstetric dangers that claimed so many women of her station. On her deathbed, she whispered words of maternal devotion. "See that little one grows in love and faith as I have prayed." Her passing underscored that regardless of rank or intellect, Tudor queens faced a mortal risk in childbirth. Her brief life left behind both a namesake daughter, an emblem of undying maternal devotion, and a legacy of cultural, religious, and political contributions, spanning education, publishing, and reform. Fact 86. Jane Seymour was chosen for her meek manner that posed no challenge to Henry Jane Seymour, who had served both Anne Boleyn and Anne of Cleves in the royal household, caught Henry VIII's eye for the very quality that his previous queens lacked: unassuming deference. Where Anne Boleyn had pressed her views on church reform and Anne of Cleves had demonstrated independent spirit, Jane offered unwavering obedience. From the moment of their courtship, she never disputed the king's decisions, addressed him only with solemn courtesy, and fulfilled her duties without ever seeking influence. Her family recognized that in an era when royal marriages could ignite political conflict, a wife who would never question the sovereign's faith or policies was an invaluable asset. They drilled her in protocol when Henry spoke. She bowed her head. When he gifted her, she repeated a simple, "I thank your Majesty." This perfected humility reassured both the king and the conservative ministers that no courtly upheaval would follow. In the hush of Hampton Court's corridors, Jane emerged as the personification of the ideal consort, powerless by design, decorative by duty, and wholly devoted to maintaining royal harmony. Fact 87. Jane Seymour received splendid gifts, yet always responded with utter humility during her first year as queen. Jane Seymour was showered with lavish presents, gold-encrusted jewels, silken gowns, and fine brocaded cloth from Henry VIII himself, and from foreign ambassadors eager to curry favour. Pearls as large as teardrops, ruby necklaces, and embroidered coifs glittered in her chambers, leading ladies in waiting to whisper that she shone like a star fallen from heaven. Yet Jane's gratitude was never ostentatious. Each time she received a gift, she would kneel, bow her head, and murmur, "I give thanks to your Majesty and the realm," before quietly redistributing the excess. She sent spare gems to local convents, handed brocades to poor women, and rerouted valuable fabrics to charitable causes. By diverting her bounty to the needy, Jane demonstrated genuine compassion and distanced herself from courtly vanity. Her selfless generosity pleased Henry and his council. They saw in her a queen who both embodied submissive loyalty and bolstered royal benevolence. Through this graceful interplay of deference and charity, Jane cemented her reputation as a merciful queen who used her imperial largesse to bind king and commoner in mutual gratitude without ever drawing attention to her own soft power. Fact 88. Jane guided the making of prayers or meditations without penning a word herself. Truth 88. A fact so revealing it may leave you restless centers on Jane Seymour's subtle yet decisive role in the creation of prayers or meditations. 1545. Although she did not compose the text line by line, Jane personally curated the devotional passages, worked closely with scholars like Archbishop Thomas Cranmer and playwright Nicholas Udall, and oversaw each editorial revision to ensure the content aligned with emerging Protestant thought. Rather than writing the manuscript herself, Jane presided over gatherings where excerpts were read aloud, directing adjustments to tone and theology, and safeguarding against any phrase that might provoke charges of heresy. Her quiet leadership turned the book into a royal endorsement of moderate reform, while shielding her from the political fallout that overt authorship might have brought. This orchestration of religious publishing, Fact 88, proved far more daring than any public intervention, revealing Jane's skill in wielding influence behind the scenes. Fact 89. Jane bore a daughter with Thomas Seymour but never saw her grow after Henry's death. Jane Parr married Thomas Seymour in early 1547 and soon became pregnant. On the 5th of September, 1548, at Sudeley Castle, she delivered a daughter named Mary Seymour. Witnesses recount Jane's brief moment of radiant joy as she embraced the newborn, whispering, "My child, may you inherit faith and courage." Tragically, Jane's life ebbed swiftly thereafter. Stricken by puerperal fever today, known as childbed fever, she clung to life only a few hours before passing away. Her final charge to Thomas Seymour was a plea to raise Mary in love and devotion, a testament to a mother's fierce affection, even as death approached. Little Mary Seymour, dubbed the Tudor Rose, was left motherless at her first breath. Embodying the era's cruel reality, skilled attendants and royal favour could not overcome the dangers of childbirth. Jane's fleeting motherhood stands as a poignant coda to her story, a reminder that Tudor queens, whether bearing an heir or a daughter, faced mortal peril even at the moment of greatest triumph. In these three truths, from Jane's humble charity and her covert hand in religious publishing to her tragic final hours with her infant daughter, we see a queen who mastered the art of influence without fanfare, only to be claimed by the very hazards that defined her station. And remember fact 88 may yet keep you turning these pages in disbelief. Fact 90. Jane Parr's death closed the tragic chapter of Henry VIII's wedded life. On the 5th of September, 1548, Jane Parr passed away at the age of 36, bringing to an end the woeful saga of Henry VIII's matrimonial trials. Her funeral at Sudeley Castle was marked by reverence rather than political manoeuvring. She alone among his consorts was interred within the castle grounds, honoured for her contributions to culture and faith rather than entangled alliances. Jane's departure left a different kind of echo in the Tudor court. It was not another forced annulment or execution, but a deeply personal loss, one born of childbirth's cruel aftermath. Chroniclers in later generations christened her the last gentle queen, and lavender wreaths became the emblem of her memory, a tribute to the flowers she tended in life. With Jane's death, Henry's famous string of 6 wives, 2 who died young, 2 beheaded, and 2 divorced reached its final turn. Yet history would remember Jane not for the length of her marriage, but for having navigated the perilous role of queen in relative safety, and for leaving a lasting legacy of religious and literary patronage that shaped Elizabeth I's reign. Fact 91. Jane Parr was Henry's only wife, never to entangle him with a mistress. In contrast to his earlier marriages, most notably the scandals involving Mary Boleyn and Elizabeth Blount, Henry VIII never carried on a single recorded extramarital affair during his union with Jane Parr. She maintained her role as faithful consort so completely that the king found no excuse or desire to seek a liaison elsewhere. Jane's unwavering loyalty and discreet comportment earned her a level of trust absent with his previous queens. She returned Henry's affection with steadfast devotion rather than political ambition, securing her position until her tragic passing. In an era when royal mistresses were commonplace, Jane's singular fidelity stands out as a remarkable testament to her character and to the unique respect Henry held for her. Fact 92. Jane Parr was the only queen granted a princess in her own right title in 1544, as diplomatic ties with the Holy Roman Empire were cemented. Henry VIII bestowed upon Jane Parr the unprecedented honour of the title Princess in her own right. Alongside her status as queen, she received a separate, generous endowment, £4,000 per annum, that existed entirely apart from the royal coffers. This distinction elevated her above all Henry's former consorts. She enjoyed tax exemptions, the privilege of holding her own court, and the right to adjudicate minor legal matters within her residences. By granting Jane this independent rank, Henry signalled his special esteem, recognising her contributions to his realm in a manner no previous queen had ever received. Fact 93. Jane Parr founded England's first royal scholarships for women, breaking new ground in 1543. Jane Parr established what became known as the Parr Scholarships at Oxford University, an endowment reserved exclusively for 3 deserving young women of limited means. Each scholarship covered tuition, board, and living expenses, opening doors to higher education previously closed to Tudor gentlewomen. Her initiative shattered long-standing barriers. Until then, university study was the near-exclusive province of men. By championing female scholarship, Jane laid the foundation for women's intellectual advancement in England, creating a legacy of learning that would echo well beyond her own lifetime. Fact 94. Jane Parr lived in constant worry during Henry's grueling final illness. In the years before Henry VIII succumbed in January 1547, the king suffered from chronic leg ulcers that required multiple painful operations. Jane Parr devoted herself to his care, tending his dressings and braving the foul odours and infection risks within Hampton Court's infirmary. Each dawn she listened anxiously for news of his condition, haunted by the thought that a dying Henry might alter his will to her detriment or worse. Her vigilance paid off upon Henry's death. She was secure in her position and inheritance. Yet the strain of those final months left its mark on her health and spirit. a reminder that even a beloved queen lived in the shadow of Tudor mortality and political uncertainty. In these 5 truths, we see Jane Parr's unique place in Henry VIII's tumultuous marital history, her dignified farewell, her unmatched fidelity, her groundbreaking titles and charitable acts, and her steadfast care in the king's last days. Though her life was far too brief, she reshaped the role of queen, proving that courage, compassion, and quiet innovation could leave an indelible mark on an age ruled by power and peril. Fact 95. Jane Parr's final charge prayers for Henry's dynasty and young Elizabeth. In the waning hours before Henry VIII's death, Jane Parr took up her place in the royal chapel one last time and led a solemn prayer for the realm. With her soft voice echoing beneath vaulted arches, she entreated the gathered courtiers and common folk alike to pray for the peaceful repose of His Majesty's soul and for the brightness of Princess Elizabeth's future reign. Rather than dwell on her own sorrow, Jane dedicated herself to strengthening the bonds of succession, urging those present to remember Mary and Elizabeth as the rightful heirs of Tudor England. Her words were later immortalized in widely circulated woodcut pamphlets, ensuring that her plea would endure beyond the chapel walls. By directing public devotion toward Elizabeth's destiny, Jane quietly secured the stability of the crown and set the spiritual groundwork for what would become one of England's most celebrated reigns. In this, her final act of service, she fulfilled her duty to the kingdom, demonstrating that even at the edge of personal loss, she remained the steadfast guardian of the Tudor line. Fact 96. Catherine Howard's scandal adultery with Culpeper and Derham Bailey, months into her marriage to Henry VIII, joined in late July 1540. Catherine Howard, barely 19, found herself at the centre of a furious scandal. Rumours of a premarital liaison with Francis Derham, a young courtier, had circulated before her wedding. More shocking still were her secret meetings with Thomas Culpeper, a gentleman of the king's privy chamber. When Henry discovered love letters and the men's confessions, his rage knew no bounds. He viewed Catherine's betrayal as the gravest treachery. She, his queen, had violated the sacred oath of marital fidelity. A swift and merciless trial was convened within the Tower of London. Francis Derham and Thomas Culpeper were declared guilty of high treason for their adulterous plots and swiftly sentenced to the block. Catherine herself was indicted for royal adultery, a crime equated under Tudor law with a breach of national trust. On the 13th of February 1542, she knelt before grim officials and was formally stripped of her title and exiled to Sion House. Her fate sealed, she awaited execution in those final terror-filled hours. Fact 97. Catherine Howard's youthful end, the youngest queen to die by the axe. On that cold morning of February the 13th, 1542, Catherine Howard, no more than 21, was led to the scaffold at the Tower's courtyard. Draped in a simple ash-grey gown, she showed remarkable composure. A hired French swordsman, famed for his single, clean stroke, stood ready. In a moment lasting seconds, the blade fell, and the life of Henry VIII's youngest executed wife ended with heartbreaking finality. Catherine's public death reverberated through England's nobility. Even the most innocent-faced maiden could not evade the king's wrath. Her tragic fate served as a grim testament to the absolute power of the Tudor monarch and the unassailable reach of royal decree. The joyful promise of youth met the unyielding severity of royal justice, an enduring reminder of how swiftly favour could curdle into fatal judgment under Henry's reign. Fact 98. Catherine Howard left no heirs to Henry VIII. Despite the fateful briefness of her union with Henry VIII, Catherine Howard remains unique among his 6 queens in never bearing him a child. All her predecessors had struggled Catherine of Aragon with infertility, Anne Boleyn with a daughter only, and then tragic miscarriages, yet each had at least been pregnant or delivered. Catherine Howard, by contrast, never conceived. Even under the weight of Tudor expectation that her womb would finally produce a son, her fleeting time as queen offered no opportunity for pregnancy. cut short by scandal and execution. In her fall, Henry lost what he saw as his final chance to extend the Tudor line through yet another marital alliance. Her fate underscores the tragic lack of bodily autonomy afforded royal women who were valued solely for their reproductive capacity and offered scant protection when they could not fulfill that role. Fact 99. Jane Seymour, the sole bearer of the Tudor heir among all 6 of Henry's wives. It was only Jane Seymour, his third queen, who succeeded in delivering a male successor. On the 12th of October 1537, she gave birth to Edward Tudor, the much yearned-for prince whose arrival ensured the continuation of the dynasty. Edward would ascend the throne at the tender age of 9 upon his father's death in 1547, ushering in a reign shaped by regents, first his uncle, Edward Seymour, Duke of Somerset, and later John Dudley, Duke of Northumberland. Although Jane's joy was tragically brief, she lived only 2 days after Edward's birth. Her singular achievement defined her legacy. In her final act, she fulfilled the Queen's most essential duty, even as that success cost her life, cementing her place as the only one of Henry's wives to secure a male heir. Fact 100. The King criminalized hidden premarital affairs. Just 1 day after Catherine Howard's execution on the 14th of February, 1542, Henry VIII enacted the Act for the Wives of the King's Next Degree, commonly nicknamed the Act for No Secret Histories. This law declared that any woman who concealed a premarital sexual relationship before marrying the king would be deemed a traitor. It was widely seen as a direct response to Catherine's betrayal. Henry codified his personal grievance into national statute, ensuring no future consort could hide past indiscretions without risking the death penalty. Scholars regard the measure as unusually vindictive, turning a private scandal into a framework of legal terror and illustrating how Henry wielded legislative power for deeply personal ends. Fact 101. The shattered legacy of 6 marriages, with only 1 son. The final tally of Henry VIII's marital saga is stark 6 wives, 2 dying natural deaths, Catherine of Aragon and Jane Seymour, 2 beheaded for alleged treasonous adultery, Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard, and 2 divorced or annulled without issue, Anne of Cleves and Catherine Parr. Only Jane Seymour bore him a son, Edward VI, who would reign but a few short years. These figures portray Henry as perhaps the most lethal spouse in English royal history, wielding supreme authority to end marriages through law and force whenever a wife did not serve dynastic needs. Yet in tandem with this grim record, Henry's reign also reshaped England's constitutional and religious landscape. His break with Rome, the establishment of the Church of England, and reforms to succession law created enduring changes. The saga of his 6 consorts therefore stands as a deeply human tragedy of love, power, and mortal consequence, set against the backdrop of nationwide transformation that still resonates in English history today. After journeying through 101 shocking and somber truths about Henry VIII and his 6 wives, we gain a portrait of a monarch whose unyielding ambition and thirst for heirs shaped not only his personal life but the fate of a nation. We see Catherine of Aragon's unwavering dignity in exile, Anne Boleyn's fierce intellect and tragic fall, Jane Seymour's heartbreaking sacrifice and singular success in producing a male heir, Anne of Cleves's pragmatic survival and diplomatic grace, Catherine Parr's pioneering role in religious reform and female authorship, and Catherine Howard's youthful indiscretion and fatal misstep. Henry emerges as a man both larger than life and bound by dynastic urgency, a king whose love could turn to wrath, whose favour could elevate or destroy, and whose legal reforms, whether motivated by grief, vengeance, or piety, reshaped England's religious and constitutional landscape. Throughout these episodes, the 6 women appear as living testaments to qualities both admired and feared in Tudor society: virtue and vice, piety and political acumen, obedience and daring. Their stories underscore how little autonomy royal women possessed, yet also reveal the subtle ways some reclaimed authority through charity, literature, patronage, and personal resilience. We recognize that Tudor marriage for Henry was less a union of partners and more a transaction of power and progeny. Each queen's fate hinged on her ability to serve the crown's most relentless demand. Yet the legacies they left: charitable endowments, published works, legal precedents, and the one true male heir continue to inform our understanding of female agency under monarchical rule. Now it's your turn. Which fact struck you as most credible or most compelling? Comment below with the number and title of the truth that made you nod in agreement, and if any details seem dubious or you'd like to challenge its accuracy. Let us know which one and why. Your insights will spark a vibrant discussion among history lovers just like you. Thank you for watching all 101 Truths about Henry VIII's wives. If you found value in these tales of ambition, devotion, and tragedy, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden corners of the past. May these stories inspire curiosity and compassion as we remember those who lived under Tudor power. Good night, and sleep well tomorrow. Let your dreams wander through the corridors of history until we meet again.